I think there's also a misconception when it comes to manifestation that, we can just sit on the sofa and manifest it and it's going to land on our lap.
So welcome to the show, Caroline Smith Mclean.
Thanks, Cayde. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So what was the event that got you into hypnotherapy and mindset coaching?
Okay, so about 13 years ago, I was actually working in a cafe. Me and my mum and dad ran a cafe. And I had two very small boys. So my youngest was 2 and my eldest was about 5. And we came to the end of the cafe because my parents wanted to retire. Obviously, I had boys. And we closed the cafe and I had a full-blown mental breakdown. So I would actually see things happening to the boys. I would see them falling out of the window. I would see awful things happening all the time. And I'd be really confused. I'd run outside to see what was happening and they wouldn't be there. And I was really, really confused. I'd spend days just on the floor crying. I didn't want to change my youngest son's nappy. I didn't want to do cooking and cleaning. I didn't want to do any of it. And I couldn't understand. My brain physically hurt. And I actually went to the doctors and I said, I've got a brain tumor, but I don't really care. I don't care. And she said to me, I think you're depressed. So she put me on antidepressants. Now, the antidepressants, they did their job, as in they numbed me for a period of time, but they also didn't feel good. And I tried various types of therapy. So I tried some traditional counselling, I tried some CBT, and neither of those did what I needed them to do for me. I was having panic attacks all the time. And then I actually had hypnotherapy and it was like a weight had lifted. I didn't need to talk about what was going on for me because that was a real struggle at the time. But I suddenly felt as though I'd processed loads of stuff that had been going on. I just felt like this weight had lifted and I felt better. And that day that my mental breakdown was the best thing that ever happened to me, because actually for years before I even had that mental breakdown, I'd been suffering with really bad anxiety that I hadn't even recognized, feeling sick every day. I had a phobia of knives, which working in a kitchen, a little bit bizarre. I had a really severe fear of bees and wasps, and they were quite, controlling of my life. So yeah, that mental breakdown, as difficult as it was at the time, it led me on to actually having hypnotherapy. And a few years later, I was looking to do something different. I was working in quite a high pressure job as an estate agent. And I was like, it just doesn't feel good. And I just need to do something that I feel is helping other people, but also something that I really enjoy doing. And I just woke up one day and was like, I'm going to retrain as a hypnotherapist.
Would you say that hypnotherapy was clearly the missing link for you, but like you said, was trying all the other types of therapy? What do you think it was about hypnotherapy that made you go, this is the one over the different flavors? It kind of reminds me in the same way as getting in shape. Like for some people, they'll get really on well with kind of aesthetics. I get on better with going to the gym, but someone else might prefer CrossFit. It sounds like you picked your flavor of therapy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like I say, at that point, I was so numb that when I went to see the counselor and I was being asked questions, I felt as though my brain was made of cement. So I felt as though I had no answers to those questions. And I also feel that with hypnotherapy, obviously we're working with the subconscious part of the brain, rather than the conscious part. So for me, somebody asking me what had led me to feeling like I was feeling, I actually couldn't answer that question. There was nothing, like I say, it was like my brain was made of cement. So those answers didn't come to me while she was asking me these questions. With hypnotherapy, it was a bit like I was having this lovely little nap and restorative session. But whilst, like I say, I was processing all of the stuff going on. And I mean, for me with CBT, we talked a lot about my panic attacks I was having at that time. And because our brain can't tell the difference between imagination and reality, as we were talking about panic attacks, I would leave the session and have a panic attack because I'd built up this whole picture and image of what my panic attacks looked like. So yeah, I definitely found that hypnotherapy for me was the changing point. I mean, as you know, Cayde, I've gone on to train in lots of other modalities as well, like NLP, timeline therapy, and now a breathwork facilitator. So I am a constant learner. If I find that something works for me, then that's something I really want to bring for my customers as well.
And manifestation coaching, and now, yeah, as you were saying about the panic attacks, it kind of reminded me of, I forget exactly where I heard this, but there was someone who said if you tell someone that they're a certain way, they will act that way. So there was a guy who did an experiment where he got someone to the participants to close their eyes, hold their arm out, and then he said, it's on the lines of you're strong, you can resist me pushing down on your arm. Then he did the same thing, same person, but flipped it, where it was like, you're weak, you're going to collapse. And the guy just like,
Yeah.
it sounds a lot like, you know what I mean? It's like with your panic attacks, it sounded a lot like, we'll talk about panic attacks, abracadabra.
It's a bit like if I was to now talk to you about a time in your life that was really difficult, really hard, your body would start to feel those emotions of that particular time. Whereas if I was to speak to you about a time when you felt really happy, really good, then you would start to feel more of those emotions. And this isn't me saying that traditional therapies, are no good, they don't work. They absolutely are really helpful for some people. Just for me at that point, it wasn't. And a lot of the customers that I have that come to work with me, a lot of the time they've already tried counselling, and they may have talked over, why certain things have happened to them or why they've done certain things, but that doesn't actually change how they are doing it. Does that make sense? So that's the kind of piece that I help them with, is how to change the behaviors, and even as far as changing our identity, because our identity is kind of always leading the way. Exactly like you say, if you have an identity that you're stupid, then you are going to go through life with those glasses on, and you're going to get evidence of being stupid.
Because I remember when I did counselling for 2 years. Now, I've always said this about the guy. Lovely guy, I've got a lot of time for him, and I got on with him really well. But by the end of 2 years, I even said to him, was like, I would have been better off going doing something else. And then even with my little bit of therapy that I had, even though that completely didn't work out for me, there were bits of it that did, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I only did that for like, what, 6-8 months?
And that's it. It can be really helpful for awareness as well, can't it?
Would you agree with me if I said people have been taught to recognize awareness, but they've not been taught what to do about it? That's something which I struggle with this one myself. So I have it at work because at least you're aware of it. I'm like, yeah, but what do I do about it? Do I just juggle penguins or something?
And that's it, isn't it? It's about, when we change the beliefs, we change the behavior. And that's the difference. We can be as self-aware as we want, but if we are still repeating the same behaviors because we still have the same beliefs, then actually nothing's changing. We're just aware that nothing's changing.
And how would people go about changing their beliefs? Because there seems to be quite a bit of contradictory evidence or like statements on the internet. I know one of my heroes, Alex Hormozy, says you build on deniable second proof that you are the other thing and then you become the thing. Some people say, oh, just believe and then how would you go about changing someone's core beliefs? Because if the subconscious is running 90% of the show and trying to keep you safe, how do you tell it, it's the other thing now?
So I kind of work with a multi-pronged approach, if you like. There are several modalities that you can use for a start. Nervous system regulation is very popular at the moment, and there's a really good reason for that. If our nervous system is in overload, we're already starting off on the back foot. We're already starting off where our brain, our body, it feels unsafe. So there are tools to help with nervous system regulation, breath work, which I'm a massive advocate for breath work, meditation, hypnotherapy, somatic exercises. All of these things are fantastic for nervous system regulation, but also just slowing down. I did a post about this morning about how we can use all these tools, but what about our day-to-day life where we're eating in a rush whilst we're typing on our laptop and we're racing about everywhere we go? Like literally just slowing down and taking a breather and just being a bit more present with life. That's also a big part of nervous system regulation. As far as changing beliefs are concerned, again, I've got modalities, especially some of the NLP modalities that we can use to actually change a belief, because whatever we are doing, we always create a picture with that belief, with that feeling. And with NLP, we kind of merge that picture with a picture that we want in our brain. So that can be really, really helpful for changing those beliefs. But what I will say as well is there's always going to be a certain element of feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Like, even at the point I'm at now, say, for example, I'm trying to think of a good example. So in relationships, for example, it's never felt safe for me to communicate my needs in relationships. And it's something that I've done a lot of work on. And in my last relationship, I really pushed myself to talk about what was going on for me, even when it felt so uncomfortable. Like, I still needed to make that choice that I was going to do it regardless of it making me uncomfortable. And now I'm at the point where I can do that and it doesn't faze me. Like, my nervous system is so much more solid than it was then. And I've practiced it enough that now that feels safe for me to do. And so part of this is lived experience, you know, doing the thing, even though it may, and being okay with feeling slightly uncomfortable at certain points. And just one more thing, Cayde, I want to say is, so I've just read a book called The Choice. It's by a lady called Edith something, I can't remember her full name, but it's actually about a lady who went to the concentration camps during the war. As you can imagine, it was horrific. The things she's seen, the things that were going on for her were horrific. And she actually spoke to Viktor Frankl a little bit later on in her life, who wrote Man's Search for Hidden Meaning. Now, both of them had very similar experiences in the concentration camps, and both of them had a really similar way of how they dealt with that, which is to make their inner world bigger than their outer world. Even during the most horrific times of being in these concentration camps, they were able to live in this world that actually felt okay. You know, not all the time, obviously, but majoritively. The lady that wrote the book, she even played games and like had all these ways of dealing with really difficult situations. And I think that's something that a lot of people have lost. We give so much of our power away to other people, to outside circumstances. And actually, when you can really make that inner world stronger than your outer world, we can take on so much more. Like, even the way we speak to ourselves and the thoughts that we're having about ourselves, like, we expect other people to treat us in a way that we don't even treat ourselves.
How would someone make their inner world more compelling than their outer world? Because as you were saying with Edith and her book, The Choice, and yeah, I did watch a video the other week about what happened at the concentration camps, and I thought, yeah, this is pleasant timing, because I watched it like just before I went to sleep. I thought, this is a perfect time. But how would people create a good inner world? Because I'd say my inner world, you kind of want something else which isn't in this world, if that's the best way to put it.
And I mean, again, it takes practice. It's not something that's click of the fingers overnight. It is something that takes practice, but it's absolutely possible. So for me, I guess when I started, I used a lot of affirmations, which, you know, people see affirmations as being quite woo-woo, quite spiritual. And actually, the way I always describe affirmations is they are thoughts that we are choosing. So again, people think that their thoughts have control over them, or that their thoughts are who they are. And to some degree, we need to be able to just ignore our thoughts and know that they are just thoughts. They're not necessarily truth. And so things like affirmations, I mean, hypnotherapy is, and you know, the tools that we've been discussing for changing those subconscious, deep-rooted thoughts and beliefs, they're really, really powerful, because most people are living way too much in their brain, way too much in the logical, like, you know, conscious part of their brain. And even when it comes to like solving problems, how many times do we solve something by overthinking it? Like, we can't change somebody else's behavior by overthinking it. That's not going to happen. The only thing we can have control of is our inner world. And so it's about reminding yourself of that and continuing to change that, those inner conversations, which again, like I say, hypnotherapy, the NLP tools, the breath work, and also just like our imagination. Like we still have the power of imagination as adults because we're meant to use it. It's like our rehearsal for life, but most people are using it to imagine worst case scenarios, all the things that could go wrong, all the things that could go badly.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, the worst case scenario doesn't happen, or if it does, it's not nearly as bad.
Yeah.
You also got into manifestation coaching, and how does that link up with your hypnotherapy and timeline therapy?
So again, it's kind of combining that whole belief system with manifestation. And, you know, whether we look at manifestation on a logical level, as in, like I've said to you before, I quite often describe how we perceive things as wearing glasses. Okay, so if we've got the glasses on that we are amazing, we're successful, we're desirable in a relationship, you know, all of these things, then we are much more likely to see evidence of that. And that, like I say, we can explain that very logically. We've got the reticular activating system part of our brain. We've got other parts of the brain that are programmed to, you know, quite often I describe it to people like the algorithm. Like, you know, if you are searching something on Instagram, you then get more and more and more of that algorithm coming up. And our brain works in the same way. It gives us more and more and more evidence of whatever we're focusing on. So when we're focusing on the things we love about ourselves, the things that are going well, then logically we see more of those things. And if we take it from a manifestation standpoint, then, you know, it is creating what we want by stepping into that new identity of ourselves. So I talk about living in the state of the wish fulfilled, which is already being in the state of having your desires. And for me, that's a very win-win way of doing things, because whether you get the physical manifestation or not, and I always talk to people about manifestation is also having patience, you know, not being in a rush because you should already feel as though you have it, but is a win-win situation in the sense that you already feel as though you have that thing. And we always want something to give us the feeling anyway. That's the only reason we ever want something, whether it's being safe and secure, whether it's, you know, feeling like we can go to another country or whatever it is. It's the feeling that we're looking for, not the physical thing itself anyway.
Why is the feeling and not the physical thing?
Because the physical thing is the thing that we're desiring, but the reason we want that physical thing is to give us the feeling. So with manifestation, it's kind of doing things the opposite way around. So you give yourself the feeling, and then the physical thing will at some point happen. We're just not going to rush to get it, because that's from a state of lack.
What if you actually need it quickly? So let's say, yeah, you don't know people's circumstances though. That's the thing. That's always been one of my criticisms with when people say be patient, it takes time, or don't need. It's like, yeah, but what if I got a kid and I need to go get treatment for him or something? This is why I get the sentiment where don't just wait your turn and don't be panicky. But yeah, that's just always been a problem. Go on.
I think there's also a misconception when it comes to manifestation that, you know, we can just sit on the sofa and manifest it and it's going to land on our lap. You know, that situation that you just described, if one of my children needed something, I would absolutely find a way of getting it. So this is not sit back, you know, oh, my kid needs something, let me just sit and, you know, meditate for an hour. No, I'm going to be taking the action. But I also want to be taking action from an identity of, you know, knowing how powerful I am and that I am able, if I really, really want something, to get it. And I'm going to use a really bizarre example of this now, Cayde. I hope this is okay to talk about. But so I watched a program a while ago about some drug addicts that live in Bristol. Okay, they live in a multi-tower car park in Bristol. Now, these drug addicts every single day are able to make £300. They have no jobs. They have no, you know, but they are able to make £300 a day to feed their habit. And that is a great example of when we really want something, we will make it happen. So it's not about, sitting in this place of just chilling and waiting for it to happen. It is about taking action. But I would also say that action needs to be from a place of knowing how powerful you are, not a disempowered place of lack. Oh, I can't make this happen, but I'm going to keep trying.
You reminded me of a post I've seen on social media where it says, you're being out-hustled by a drug dealer or a drug addict, right? I was like, oh dear.
Yeah.
How would people then shift into where they make it happen as opposed to it's a nice thing to have? Because that's something I've personally struggled with for a long time, where I'm going to make this happen, but then at the same time, it's kind of a nice thing to have at the same time. If that makes sense, I want it, but...
So I would say that the very, very first, most important foundation of everything is feeling actually worthy of it, which sounds too simple. But if we don't feel worthy of it, regardless of whether we take the actions to say we've got it, if we don't feel worthy of it, then we're likely to even sabotage it. So let's take, for example, relationships, which is one of the biggest areas that I work with. From my own experience, I was in a relationship for 17 years. Now, people quite often say, oh, how long have you been in your relationship? 17 years? Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing if the relationship is good. But if it's not, and you've been in that relationship for 17 years, it wasn't until I'd had hypnotherapy and I started to see things differently and actually start to recognize that I deserved more than the way I was being treated, which at times was quite manipulative and, emotionally abusive. Yet I'd never, ever even recognized it. I'd never seen any of that because I didn't have that level of self-worth. So I can't even sit here and put all the blame on him for how he treated me, because I didn't expect any more. I didn't expect differently to that. So at that point, I then really worked on my self-belief and how I felt about that. And I was able to start shifting that dynamic in relationships. Now, I hadn't done enough work when I met somebody, my next relationship after him. And I got into that relationship and he was very loving. He was very, he was trying his best to meet my needs. Yet I was so hypervigilant and feeling like I didn't deserve to be treated so well that I sabotaged it. So it's not just about getting the thing either. You see what I mean? Whether it's relationships, whether it's money, if we still have a belief that we're not good enough, that we're not worthy, then we will find a way of sabotaging that belief. And so this is why the multi-pronged approach of feeling good enough, calming your nervous system, so that actually if toxicity has always been your normal, even though it doesn't feel good, it's comfortable. You're comfortable in the uncomfortable.
Yeah, I also think, would you say environment plays a lot into people's staying the way they are? Because this is something I learned from my warehouse job, was we weren't properly trained what to do, but the thing was the job was so simple, we just learned from each other. It's like monkey see, monkey do. It's kind of like, where I'm going with this is, would you say it's the same mentality, but with people's lack of feeling worth? They don't deserve money, they don't deserve a relationship, they don't deserve the life they want, because everyone else around them is basically in the same boat. So I'm going to say, let's say someone works for Tesco's, just for the sake of argument, and they don't want to be a famous actor, but they don't feel worthy of it because everyone else or their work colleagues feels the same. Would you say, and in that case it's an environmental thing, would you say that has massive influence?
I mean, I would absolutely say it has some influence. And obviously, childhood stuff influences us as we get old. We know that the subconscious part of the brain is really primed between the ages of 0 and 5. So that's really young for it to be primed. And in your example that you gave in somebody that works in Tesco, so they say that we are, the 5 people that we spend the most time with. So what I would say for somebody in that situation is, it's not environmental as in you can absolutely work in Tesco's and go after your dream of being a famous actor, but you need to start surrounding yourself with other people that have big dreams, big goals, big aspirations, because why would you not put yourself into spaces where other people believe in you too, and you're able to believe in yourself? And this is where, that book that I talked about, The Choice, life is constantly a choice that we get to make. Like, we we really stay stuck in this feeling that our past has to be our future. And actually, we have to make a choice that regardless of what happened in my past, I am able to forge a different future because I really want it.
Yeah, I think that's partly why, because me and you are part of the same network. Shout out to the Misfits, I guess. I think that's one thing personally I've done really well is, okay, I don't like where I am in where I currently live, but I wouldn't say respite, that's completely the wrong word, but you know what I mean? I get that little taste or little break where I get to go and surround myself with like-minded people, even if it's like once or twice a month. I think that has, even little things like that can have a big influence on you.
Oh, 100%, because there's other people that also believe in themselves, and other people that are sometimes taking action even though it feels scary. Because like I say, it's not necessarily, oh, I'm going to do this work and so that fear goes away. I mean, I've done loads of work on myself, but say for example procrastination. So we were sitting down this morning to get on this call, and I was like, right, well, I'm going to sit down on my computer for half an hour before I speak to Cayde. But I've still procrastinated this morning. I've still had to call myself out on that and say, Caroline, you are procrastinating. Like, stop filling up the dishwasher when actually you want to be doing this. So, you know, again, it's a choice. We have to decide, right, I want something different, so I can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I'm going to have to do something different and able to get a different result.
I also would say to people who clear out your current space, so it's taken me forever to basically get rid of my old stuff, which I'm still in the process of doing, but I don't nearly have as much stuff. But do you notice this is something I've experienced where you're trying to get rid of the old you, but then ironically your old you crops up in your behaviors and what you used to do? Because have you ever read The Writer's Journey, 25th edition by Christopher, I think his surname's Flogger or something, not like Flogger as in that, like vloggers and like writes an article on social media kind of vlog.
I have not, no, I've not read that.
There's a bit that really stuck out to me, which was whenever you try and get change, your old self tends to fight back. And have you seen that with some of your clients where they start to change and then their old self's like, no, I must live on. I'm like, no, can you just die or something?
Absolutely. And I've had this for myself. So when I do manifestation coaching, I quite often talk about so Neville Goddard is one of the old school manifestation writers that I've read quite a lot of, and he talks about the old man must die. Okay. And that can be an uncomfortable process. So I was actually speaking to one of my customers the other day who said she feels like she's almost going through a period of grief. And I said, oh my gosh, I recognize that so much, because when I was shifting identity, it is literally like grieving an old version of you. And exactly like you say, sometimes with that pop up these circumstances that I'm going to say test whether you are still the old version of you or whether you're choosing to be the new version of you. And I guess that's what I'm saying, that actually, even when we've done the work, it definitely becomes easier. But also sometimes there's still discomfort with choosing what the new version of you is doing. But it becomes easier to live in that discomfort and to say, do you know what? I know this is going to pass. I know that this is testing me because my subconscious, my brain, whatever, wants to go back to what's familiar, what's comfortable, but I don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah, I had it the other day where I missed my gaming. I was like, oh, I really wish I could play my video games again. I was like, yeah, A, you can't, and B, I don't want to go back to that. I think, have you ever heard the term burn the boats? This is something which has stuck to me ever since. Yeah, for those who don't know, there was a guy called, what's his first name again? It's something Cortex, or something like that. Basically, he invaded one of the Americas, can't remember which, and he orders men to burn the boats, and he said, so they did, and he said to his men, by the way, we ain't going home now, so we've got to, it was basically like the Roman Empire situation where you either win or you don't go home. Or in their case, they just can't go home full stop. And in the end, they ended up conquering the entire land and taking all the riches because they just killed any chance of escaping.
And it's really, really interesting talking about manifestation, Cayde, that you chose to use those words today, because I've been working with a coach, and I've literally messaged her today and I said, I'm burning down my business. And she was like, okay. I said, because she talks about, with a lot of business owners, we add more. We're like, oh, I know, now I can do this, now I can do this, now I can do this. And she talks about deciding like who it is you really want to work with, not again from a place of I need this amount of customers to get this amount of money, but who do I really want to work with? And not just who do I want to work with, but what transformation do I want them to have? Because, that's what I want my customers to have, the transformation. I don't just want to work with people and they pay me money. That's what I'm about. If people are just paying me money to work with me but not getting any transformation, that doesn't feel good to me. So I'm burning down my business in the sense that I'm really simplifying things. I'm going to get rid of any programs that I don't feel are giving my customers the transformation that they should be getting. I'm getting rid of the programs that I don't energetically feel good doing or giving. And I'm going to simplify it so that the offers that I'm doing are something that I love and enjoy, and something that give my customers a transformation that they're looking for too.
I think some other practical advice is see what other things you can do to help with burning the boats. Right, would you believe me if I said there was this one guy who basically got himself tattooed up to the point where he wasn't going to get employment, and you tell me what his outcome was.
He found an employment that worked for him.
No, he became a famous drummer. So me and you've talked, I'm not going to share this publicly, but for reasons, but me and you talked about it just before we started. There's another thing which would really burn the boats for me. It's like, yeah, but now I've got to get on with this because now that's been shot.
Yeah, even when it's a little bit scary or uncomfortable, like just knowing that you will be okay. Like you've come through other stuff. We've all been, it's a bit like. And again, I do talk a lot about relationships in this sense because that's my area that I love working with. But like, when we've been through heartbreak, we're like, oh my God, my life is over. It's never going to be the same again. 2 years later, you're looking back going, sorry, what? Why was I even crying over this? So it goes to show that, sometimes even when it feels like things are really, really hard, sometimes actually that's the making of us, because it forces us to choose differently.
Well, you alluded to this earlier, but what is timeline therapy? I don't want to end our conversation without addressing this.
So timeline therapy is, let's take anything that's ever happened in our life, okay? It's stored in the subconscious part of the brain. Now, if we are getting things that are coming up again and again and again, so certain emotions. So when we do timeline therapy, we remove anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt off of the timeline, because none of those emotions are actually helpful for us, even though they may feel helpful for us. They've kept us safe in some way. And so what we do during timeline therapy is we revisit the very, very first time that we ever experienced that emotion. And we work out what it is we need to learn from it. And so I can't tell anybody what that learning is going to be. That's everybody has their own individual journey with that. But when we are holding on to emotions or beliefs, it's because they serve us in some way. There's some reason our brain is holding on to it. And so timeline therapy, that is, so that it can shift that belief and we can then start to do things differently.
Does timeline therapy include past lives as well?
So when I'm working with timeline therapy, I always ask people, was this before, during, or after your birth? Okay. Now, again, I never give people any indication of what answer they might give. And sometimes people are really shocked at their own answer. Now, for me, quite often when we are working with past life, if you think about kind of genetically, or even stories that are passed down, okay? So when I was doing timeline therapy for myself, so I was receiving timeline therapy, one of the questions, I think it was when we were removing sadness from my timeline. And when the person asked me the question, was this before, during, or after your life? I said before, and I was like, what? Like, how could something that I'm experiencing now have happened before my lifetime? Anyway, we went through the process of timeline therapy, and I actually went back to a scenario with my great grandmother. So my great grandmother was widowed at about 21, and she had 3 children under the age of 2. So, and she had twins and then a little boy as well. So anyway, during those days, what they used to do if you were feeling depressed is they would actually shave your hair and remove your teeth, because they thought that that was going to help. They thought your teeth were connected to your nerves. So as you can imagine, somebody who's already feeling depressed, a young woman, 21, and then they remove her teeth and her hair, is actually not going to help with the depression. Anyway, that story has been passed down to me. I've been told that depression runs in our family. Okay, so that is the story that I went back to during timeline therapy, and I cleared, and I was suddenly able to see what I needed to learn from that situation. Now, I can't remember now exactly what the learning was. I just know that I was able to learn and to release that feeling of sadness. And actually, talking about how things can sometimes test you, literally that same week, I had something came up which ordinarily would have thrown me, should have made me exceptionally sad. And whilst I was able to logically know that the situation was sad, it wasn't a nice situation, somebody I know had passed away, it also wasn't bringing up those feelings of like, I wasn't crying, I wasn't feeling sadness. I just knew that the situation was sad. So I was no longer experiencing it. And it was a bit of a strange sensation to kind of feel like, this is weird. Like, I know it's sad, but I don't feel those emotions of sadness.
I get that. I found that recently. I had something which would have normally, I had it yesterday, for example. I was stressing about something, and normally my natural reaction is to go stress eat, and I was able to find myself, actually I didn't do that at all. I thought, hooray, A, hooray, and B, I've obviously grown to some extent. Do you tend to find, it's a quick fun question, do you tend to find growth is very, very slow than what most people would find, or is that just me?
I think sometimes growth can be really subtle. It can be in those moments where you suddenly realize you've done something differently to how you've always done it. Like I say, I mean, I've had a situation where I've had to talk about something actually like recently that would have ordinarily been very uncomfortable for me to talk about. And, my nervous system actually felt so safe that it was like, again, there was that awareness that this is slightly uncomfortable, but I'm not feeling those emotions of, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't say that. And that's very, very subtle sometimes.
One last question. If someone doesn't have the means to work with someone to start like hypnotherapy, timeline therapy, or even getting started with regulating their nervous system, what can they do on their own?
So I would say, regulating your nervous system doesn't need anybody to help you with it. Like I say, it is a case of slowing yourself down, your day-to-day life, just slowing it down. And again, that takes practice. It takes being consistent. It takes, I think with anything, we have to want it enough, okay? Because these things are going to be like, my washing up still needs doing, even though I'm going to sit in the garden and have a cup of tea. No, that situation has not suddenly been solved because I want to take the time for myself. I have to decide that I want that enough for myself. And so we can do all of these things. I mean, they're breathwork things on YouTube that you can access for free. And, I would always say with these things, there is a caveat in terms of there are some medical conditions that don't necessarily work with breath work, so just be careful with those types of things. But also there are loads of things you can access for free. There's free, I often give out my hypnotherapy download to people that they want to work with me but they can't afford it yet, or they don't have the capacity to do it yet. Okay, just start listening to my download every night when you go to sleep. There are, free things. So for example, one of the things that I do regularly is cold water swimming at a lake. Well, and again, you need to make sure that medically you're okay to do that you are safe when you do things like that. But that costs no money. And so in order to do any of these things, again, you do have to start making different choices. It's not that you have to work with someone. I would definitely say that working with someone accelerates your growth. It speeds up the process. And, if we want transformation, I would say working with anybody who's already done the transformation that you're looking for is a good place to start. But it is also possible to start the process on your own.
Caroline Smith Mclean, everyone. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
So my website is my name, so www.carolinesmithmcleanhypnotherapy.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram.
Thank you for watching this episode with Caroline Smith Mclean. If you want to go into depth about any of these topics that we discussed, then I have Sarah Maud, who is a hypnotherapist, to my left, and Iana Arakri, who is a reality shifting coach, to my right.